She thought it was just a mild stomach ache, something every kid goes through. But as days passed and the pain lingered, a mother's worry turned into a terrifying reality that would test her love, her strength, and her faith. This is the emotional, true story of how ignoring the smallest symptoms nearly cost everything, and how a family's world was forever changed by what doctors finally discovered. Before we dive in, let me know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. Then, let's begin this unforgettable journey together. The morning sunlight poured gently through the slats of the kitchen blinds as Karen stirred a pot of oatmeal on the stove, the steam rising in soft swirls that filled the room with a cozy warmth. Outside, the late October breeze rustled the leaves across the quiet street of her Ohio suburb, but inside her modest home, the rush of daily life had already begun. She called up the stairs, her voice echoing with the sing-song rhythm of a mother who'd repeated the same line 1,000 times. "Lily, honey, you're going to miss the bus." From above came the hurried patter of small feet. Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway, clutching her backpack and yawning, her light brown hair still tousled from sleep. She looked pale under the overhead light, but Karen, busy ladling oatmeal into 2 bowls, didn't notice. "Mom, my stomach kinda hurts," Lily mumbled as she slid into her seat. Karen glanced at her with the distracted glance of a mother, already thinking 3 steps ahead. Work, errands, bills, the neighbor's birthday party that weekend. She offered a small smile and ruffled her daughter's hair. "Probably just ate too fast last night, sweetie. Finish your breakfast and you'll feel better." Lily stirred her oatmeal slowly, but said nothing more. The day continued in its usual rhythm. Karen dropped Lily at the bus stop, exchanged a quick hello with the crossing guard, then drove off toward the clinic where she worked part-time as a nurse assistant. It was a busy shift. The flu was going around, and her small hands-on team was swamped with runny noses, coughs, and the occasional fractured wrist. By the time she returned home that evening, she barely had enough energy to warm up leftovers. Lily was curled on the couch under a blanket, a half-eaten grilled cheese on her plate. "Still hurting?" Karen asked, concern tinged with fatigue. Lily nodded slightly. "It's not too bad," she whispered. "Just kinda there." Karen sat beside her and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "You'll feel better in the morning. Maybe just a bug." But morning came and the pain hadn't left. Over the next several days, it hovered in the background like a song stuck on repeat. Lily never complained loudly, just soft mentions of discomfort that were easy to brush aside. Karen, who had raised Lily alone since she was 5, prided herself on being practical. She didn't jump to conclusions, didn't panic at every cough or scrape. Children were resilient. She'd seen it time and time again in her work. So she stocked up on ginger ale, crackers, and children's Tylenol. When Lily's appetite dipped slightly, she chalked it up to school stress. When her daughter didn't finish her Halloween candy, something she'd never done before, Karen told herself maybe she was growing out of the sugar craze. A week passed. The pain stayed. One night, Karen found Lily awake at 2 a.m., curled up in a ball on top of her blanket, her little body tense and trembling. "It really hurts tonight," she whispered through gritted teeth. That was the first night Karen felt the cold hand of fear reach around her ribs and squeeze. She carried Lily to the bathroom and ran warm water into the tub, hoping a soak would soothe her. She sat beside the tub, holding Lily's hand, brushing wet hair from her forehead, and wondering whether she should have made an appointment sooner. But every time she thought of it, she remembered how many times she'd sat in urgent care only to be told it was nothing. Stomach flu, gas, growing pains. Still, she picked up the phone the next morning and scheduled a pediatric appointment. The soonest available was 5 days away. She took it. That afternoon, as she packed Lily's lunch with applesauce and crackers, her daughter stood quietly by the fridge. "Do I have to go to school?" Lily asked. Karen looked at her, really looked this time. Her skin was pale, her eyes tired, and she moved like each step weighed more than it should. Karen hesitated. "Let's try to get through today, sweetie. I'll pick you up early if you're not feeling good." Lily nodded, brave as always, and went to get her shoes. Later, as Karen watched the bus pull away, she felt a strange chill, like something was just out of place, like the air had shifted and she didn't yet understand why. She shook it off and turned back to the house. The laundry needed folding. There was soup to defrost. Life didn't pause, even when something whispered inside you to stop and pay attention. But that whisper was growing louder. That night at dinner, Lily barely touched her plate. Midway through the meal, she gripped her side, her face crumpling in sudden pain. Then she vomited right at the table. Karen dropped her fork and rushed to her. It wasn't just worry now, it was alarm. She cradled Lily and cleaned her up, her hands shaking in a way they hadn't since the day Lily had been born. Something was wrong. Truly wrong. Karen didn't sleep much that night, lying in bed beside her daughter, one arm over her like a shield, her eyes fixed on the ceiling as if it might give her answers. 5 more days until the appointment. 5 long, uncertain days. But Karen was no longer calm. Something inside her had shifted, and once it had, there was no going back. Karen didn't realize how often Lily had started mentioning her stomach until she found herself hearing it in the silences. It wasn't the loud complaints of a child trying to stay home from school or avoid vegetables. It was quieter than that, almost apologetic. "It still hurts a little, Mom," Lily would say while brushing her teeth or while folding her pajamas before bed. Sometimes it came as a simple wince when she climbed the stairs, or the way she pressed her palm gently over her lower belly during story time, trying not to make a fuss. Karen noticed, even if she pretended not to, and every time she did, a little voice inside her whispered, "This isn't nothing." But she'd spent years learning to silence that voice, the one that made a mother spiral at every fever, every scraped knee. She had to be strong, rational, calm, especially without a husband to steady her. Still, she began to see a rhythm in the symptoms, a quiet persistence that unnerved her more than if Lily had been crying every night. Karen tried to convince herself it was stress from school or the season changing, maybe something dietary. She even Googled persistent stomach pain in kids late one night while Lily slept, and the endless list of terrifying possibilities made her slam the laptop shut and stare into the dark for a long while. At work, Karen started checking her phone more frequently, even though she knew the school nurse would call if anything happened. Her focus drifted during patient intakes, and she found herself zoning out while taking vitals, her mind stuck on Lily's pale face at breakfast. A co-worker noticed. "Everything all right at home?" she asked kindly. Karen nodded too quickly. "Yeah, just tired." It was easier to say that than explain how something was building beneath the surface of her ordinary days, like a tremor before an earthquake. At home, she started packing simpler lunches for Lily: bananas, plain rice, apple juice. She swapped out sugary cereals for oatmeal and stocked the pantry with crackers and broth. When Lily's pain flared, Karen would rub her back and tell her everything was okay, but the words started to feel like lies. She scheduled the pediatric appointment days ago, but time moved slowly when you were waiting for answers. Each morning she checked Lily's temperature, looked for rashes, watched her walk, trying to find clues she couldn't name. Lily remained her usual self in many ways, still doing her homework, still playing with her dolls, still asking if she could stay up late on Fridays to watch cartoons. But she tired more easily. She lay on the couch more, curled into herself like she was trying to disappear. Her laughter came less often, and when it did, it was softer, smaller. Karen kept trying to talk herself out of panic. Maybe it was a virus, maybe it was a growth spurt. She reminded herself that not all pain meant disaster, but she also found herself waking up at night to check if Lily was breathing. One afternoon, Lily came home from school and went straight to bed without asking for a snack. Karen touched her forehead, no fever. She offered toast, no appetite. "Does it still hurt?" she asked gently. Lily nodded. "Not really bad, just always." That answer struck Karen like a stone to the chest. Not really bad, just always. It was the kind of pain that was easy to miss because it didn't scream, but it never left. Karen started jotting down notes in her planner: what Lily ate, what time she complained, how her energy changed. She didn't know what she was tracking exactly, but it felt like something she could control, a way to fight back against the helplessness that crept in like fog. She called her mother, June, who lived 2 towns over and often hovered between concern and criticism. "She's just delicate like you were," June said over the phone. "You had tummy troubles for years. Couldn't even eat meatloaf without a meltdown." Karen sighed. "This is different, Mom." June paused. "Well, if you're that worried, take her to the ER. But Karen didn't want to overreact. Not yet. Not before the appointment. That night, Lily asked Karen if she could sleep in her bed. It wasn't something she usually did anymore. Not since she turned 10 and insisted she wasn't a little kid. Karen opened the covers without a word and held her close as she curled up, her small body trembling faintly. "Do you think I'm sick, Mom?" she asked in the dark. Karen swallowed hard. "No, baby. I think we're going to figure this out. We're going to see the doctor soon." Lily didn't respond. Her breathing slowed. But Karen lay awake for hours, listening to the wind outside and the small sighs of her daughter's sleep, her mind running in circles around all the things she didn't yet know. Something was building, slowly, quietly. A pattern had formed, and now it was impossible to ignore. The morning of the doctor's appointment arrived with a quiet kind of dread that clung to the edges of Karen's thoughts like mist over a lake. She helped Lily dress slowly, carefully, choosing her softest leggings and a loose sweatshirt because anything snug around her belly made her uncomfortable now. Karen noticed Lily didn't argue about missing school. She didn't even ask why they were going. She simply nodded when Karen told her to grab her shoes and followed quietly, like she'd been waiting for someone to finally do something. The pediatrician's office was bright and sterile, decorated with murals of zoo animals and a bookshelf stacked with worn board books. Lily sat in the chair beside her mother, clutching a plush rabbit she hadn't taken out in years. Karen's hand found Lily's and held it tight. When they were finally called in, Karen listed everything: how long the pain had been going on, the fatigue, the loss of appetite, the moments of sharp discomfort. She even mentioned the strange vomiting episode, the one that had felt like a line in the sand. The pediatrician, a calm woman in her late 40s with kind eyes and a stethoscope that swung gently when she moved, listened and nodded, occasionally scribbling notes. She examined Lily's abdomen gently, asking questions as she pressed, and Lily winced, but answered politely. "It hurts more here," she said, pointing to her lower right side. The doctor straightened slightly. "Has she had a fever?" Karen shook her head. "Not that I've noticed." "Any change in bowel movements?" "Sometimes a little constipated, but nothing major." The pediatrician nodded again, a little slower this time, and stepped back. "Well, it could be a few things. Possibly a lingering stomach virus, or maybe a dietary sensitivity. But I'd like to run a few basic labs and maybe schedule an ultrasound just to be sure." Karen's stomach dropped. That phrase, "just to be sure," was what doctors said when they weren't sure but didn't want to scare you. She nodded quickly, trying not to let her anxiety show in front of Lily. The blood work was scheduled for that afternoon, and Karen took Lily to get a smoothie afterward, hoping to make the day feel a little less medical. Lily sipped slowly, then set the cup down half full. "It tastes weird," she whispered. Karen's chest tightened. That night something shifted. Lily came into the kitchen holding her side again, but this time she was sweating, her face pale and damp, and her breath came in shallow pants. Karen dropped the dish she was washing and ran to her. "Is it worse?" she asked, heart racing. Lily nodded, her body trembling. "It's sharp now. It hurts when I walk." Karen didn't hesitate this time. She grabbed her purse, her keys, wrapped Lily in a blanket, and drove straight to the emergency room. The hospital lights were harsh and unforgiving, the air filled with the quiet hum of machines and the rustle of movement. Nurses moved quickly around them. Karen gave the same history again, but this time the word urgent felt heavier. Lily was admitted for observation. Blood was drawn again. The ER doctor, younger than Karen expected, ordered a CT scan. Karen sat by the hospital bed, holding Lily's hand and brushing hair from her forehead. She looked so small there, lost in white, sheets and tangled cords, and Karen had never felt more helpless. Hours passed like days. When the doctor returned, his expression was different. Not panicked, but focused, serious. "We're seeing some inflammation in the abdominal area," he said. "It could be something like appendicitis, but the location and pattern look atypical. We're going to consult pediatric surgery and do a follow-up ultrasound first thing in the morning." Karen nodded stiffly. She wanted to scream, wanted answers, but all she could do was stay close and try not to let Lily see the fear in her eyes. That night, she didn't leave the hospital. She slept in a stiff chair, waking every half hour to check Lily's breathing. At dawn, Lily opened her eyes, confused. "Are we still here?" she asked. "Yeah, baby," Karen whispered. "They just want to keep an eye on you." The ultrasound technician arrived shortly after breakfast, and Karen walked alongside the gurney as they wheeled Lily down the hallway. The ultrasound room was dark and cold. Karen watched the screen as the tech moved the wand across her daughter's abdomen, her eyes scanning the grainy black and white image with a furrowed brow. She didn't say much, which made Karen nervous. "The radiologist will review this soon," the tech said politely, but her tone had changed. Back in the room, Lily dozed off, and Karen sat by the window, staring at the cars in the parking lot, wondering how everything had changed so quickly. Just 2 weeks ago, they were carving pumpkins. Just yesterday, she thought maybe it was nothing. Now, something was happening beneath the surface, something they didn't understand yet. But the symptoms had changed. They had moved from mild and quiet to sharp and undeniable. And now, the road ahead no longer felt like guesswork. It felt like a path they couldn't turn back from. Karen closed her eyes and rested her head against the wall, a single tear slipping down her cheek as the sun began to rise. Karen sat in the stiff hospital chair, the cushion long since flattened by years of tired parents before her, her fingers interlaced and white-knuckled. The room felt colder than it had the night before, though the thermostat hadn't changed. Lily was still asleep, her small body curled beneath the thin blanket, her cheeks pale against the crisp white pillow. The machines beeped steadily, measuring vitals Karen didn't know how to read, but had come to understand by rhythm alone. When the door finally opened, she looked up, expecting another nurse with a tray or a casual check-in. But this time, it was the doctor from the ER, the one with the serious eyes, and he wasn't alone. A woman followed behind him, mid-40s, no-nonsense expression, a pediatric oncologist, though Karen didn't know that yet. What she did know, what she felt instantly, was that something had shifted again. This wasn't routine anymore. This was something else. The doctor sat down, folding his hands carefully like he was trying not to break something fragile. "Karen," he began, his voice softer than before, "we've reviewed all of Lily's imaging and blood work. I'm afraid we've found something that needs further evaluation." The scans showed an abnormal mass near her right ovary. It's not typical for appendicitis or gastrointestinal issues. It could be a tumor. The word hit Karen like a blow to the chest. Tumor. It echoed in her skull, louder than the beeping machines, louder than the questions flooding her mind. She felt her stomach twist, her breath catch, her pulse race. "A tumor?" she repeated, her voice barely audible. The doctor nodded solemnly. "We don't want to speculate too far ahead without a biopsy, but given the location and appearance, it could be something like a germ cell tumor. Most are treatable, especially when caught early. But we need to act quickly." The second doctor, the woman, spoke next. "I'm Dr. Patel. I specialize in pediatric oncology. I'll be part of Lily's care team from this point forward. We'd like to do additional imaging and a surgical biopsy as soon as possible. That will help us confirm what we're dealing with." Karen looked from one face to the other, her thoughts scattering like dry leaves in a storm. Her lips moved, but no words came. She thought about Lily's soft voice saying her tummy hurt. She thought about the night Lily slept in her bed, whispering, "Do you think I'm sick, Mom?" And how Karen had lied. Now the truth was sitting right in front of her, wearing white coats and clipped clinical phrases. "How did this happen?" she asked finally. "She was fine. She was just fine." Dr. Patel nodded gently. Sometimes these things grow quietly for a while. The symptoms start small, like the ones you described. That's why we're thankful. You brought her in when you did? Karen nodded numbly, struggling to stay upright, to keep her world from tilting all the way over. She didn't want to cry. Not here, not now. Lily stirred in bed, blinking awake slowly, her hand rubbing at her eyes. "Mom," she murmured. Karen was at her side in a second, brushing back her hair. "I'm here, sweetheart," she said, her voice steadying with maternal instinct. "The doctors are just talking about how to help you feel better." Lily's gaze drifted to the doctors in the corner, then back to her mom. "Is it something bad?" Karen hesitated for a heartbeat. "We're going to find out more, but whatever it is, we're going to face it together." The little girl nodded, and that small gesture almost broke Karen. Later that day, more tests were done. Lily was brave, even when the IV pricked her small arm, even when she had to lie still inside a massive machine that hummed and clicked with invisible energy. Karen stayed beside her through all of it, her heart aching with every sigh Lily made. When they returned to the room, Dr. Patel explained the plan for the biopsy. "It's a minimally invasive surgery," she said, "but we'll do it under general anesthesia. We'll also insert a port at the same time in case chemotherapy is needed. It's better to have it ready." Karen nodded like she understood, though each word landed like a stone in her gut. Surgery, biopsy, chemotherapy. Her little girl, barely 11 years old, and already those words were circling her like vultures. She called her mother that evening. June answered on the first ring. "Karen, is everything okay?" The question undid her. Karen stepped into the hallway, away from Lily's bed, and leaned against the wall. "No, Mom," she whispered. "They think it's cancer. They're doing a biopsy tomorrow." June didn't speak for a moment, and when she did, her voice trembled. "Oh, honey, I'm coming. I'll be there first thing in the morning." Karen didn't argue. For once, she was glad not to be alone. That night, as Lily slept, Karen sat in the dim hospital light, staring out at the dark city beyond the window. The world outside kept moving, unaware that hers had just cracked wide open. She didn't know what the diagnosis would mean. She didn't know how bad it would be, or what kind of treatment Lily might face. But she knew this much. Whatever it was, there was no going back now. The words had been spoken, the path had been drawn, and tomorrow everything would change again. The morning arrived with a silence that felt too heavy for a hospital room. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a pale glow over the crisp sheets and machines lined against the wall. Karen hadn't slept. She had sat most of the night, curled in the corner chair, watching the slow rise and fall of Lily's chest, memorizing it like it might disappear. The world outside the window remained indifferent. Cars moved, streetlights blinked. The sky shifted from midnight to silver blue. But inside this sterile room, everything felt suspended. Lily opened her eyes just after 6. "Is it today?" she asked, her voice small but not afraid. Karen moved to the bedside quickly, brushing her fingers along Lily's temple. "Yes, sweetie, today, but I'll be with you the whole time." Lily nodded slowly, not asking questions, not complaining. Karen hated how grown-up she sounded. No child should have to be brave before sunrise. The surgical team came in an hour later, cheerful but measured, their voices kind but clipped with routine. They explained the steps to Karen again, how the biopsy would help determine what type of tumor it was, and how the port would be placed in Lily's chest to prepare for chemotherapy, just in case. Karen signed the forms with a hand that barely felt like her own. The letters wobbled as she tried to focus, to understand each paragraph, though the words blurred behind the thrum of her pulse. Lily was changed into a hospital gown and wrapped in warm blankets. They wheeled her down the hall while Karen walked alongside, clutching the railing of the gurney as if she could somehow anchor them both. When they reached the pre-op bay, Karen leaned down and kissed her daughter's forehead. "I'll be right here when you wake up," she whispered, fighting the tremble in her throat. "Promise?" Lily whispered back, her eyes wide and glossy. "I promise." The anesthesiologist placed the mask gently, and Lily's eyelids fluttered shut. Karen watched until they disappeared behind double doors. Then she collapsed into a waiting room chair, her body suddenly hollow. Her mother arrived shortly after, dressed in a coat too warm for the spring morning, her face drawn with worry. June sat beside her daughter and took her hand. "We'll get through this," she said firmly, the way mothers do when their daughters are crumbling. Karen nodded, not because she believed it yet, but because she needed to hear it out loud. The wait was endless. Minutes ticked by like molasses. Every time the door opened, Karen's head snapped up, her breath catching. Nurses passed, doctors moved through with purpose, but no one stopped for her. Finally, after nearly 3 hours, a surgeon appeared, a middle-aged man with weary eyes and kind hands. Karen stood up too quickly, her knees shaking. "She did well," he said gently. "The procedure went smoothly. We removed a sample of the mass and inserted the port as planned. She's in recovery now. She'll be groggy for a while, but she's stable." Relief flooded Karen so fast it almost made her dizzy. She grabbed his hand before she even thought to ask, "Did you see anything? Anything that gave you a better idea of what it is?" He hesitated, and that hesitation was its own kind of answer. "It's best to wait for pathology. But the mass was solid, not fluid-filled. We're still hoping it's a benign germ cell tumor, but we won't know until the results come back. It'll be a few days." Karen nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Thank you," she whispered. In the recovery room, Lily looked so fragile it took Karen's breath away. She had an IV in one arm and a fresh bandage just below her collarbone where the port had been placed. Her eyes fluttered open when Karen sat beside her, and a weak smile curled on her lips. "You stayed," she murmured. "I told you I would," Karen said, tears finally slipping down her cheeks. She didn't bother wiping them. Lily reached out blindly, her fingers finding Karen's, and they sat like that until the machines beeped steady and calm. Later that evening, back in her regular room, Lily drifted in and out of sleep. Nurses came and went. June brought soup. Neither of them could eat. Karen's husband, Dan, called from the road. He was driving back from a business trip, his voice thick with guilt and disbelief. "I should have been there," he kept repeating. Karen didn't have the energy to argue. What mattered now was Lily. What mattered was the next step. She looked at her daughter, curled up beneath thin covers, her skin still too pale, her breath shallow but steady. She looked at the bandage over her chest, the symbol of a war just beginning. She remembered the first time Lily ever scraped her knee, how she'd cried so hard, and Karen had picked her up, kissed it better, made the pain go away. But this pain wasn't one a kiss could fix. Night fell quietly over the hospital. The hallway dimmed, the sound softened. Karen sat beside her daughter, holding her hand, watching the soft flicker of monitors. They were waiting now, for results, for answers, for the shape of the battle ahead. But whatever came, Karen knew this. She would not leave her daughter's side, no matter how dark it got, no matter what name they gave the thing growing inside her. A mother stays. The hospital room had taken on a strange kind of familiarity, like an unwanted second home. The sterile smell of antiseptic no longer startled Karen. The hum of machines, once ominous, had faded into background noise. But the waiting, that never softened. It only grew heavier with each passing hour. Lily was awake more now, though still groggy, her energy flickering like a candle struggling against a draft. Karen stayed beside her every second, reading aloud from Lily's favorite book even though she barely turned a page. She did it more for herself than for Lily, to fill the silence that otherwise pressed too hard on her chest. June brought crossword, puzzles and magazines, tried to encourage Karen to rest, to eat, to breathe, but Karen couldn't. Not yet. Not until she knew what they were facing. Each time footsteps echoed in the hallway, Karen's heart leapt and then dropped when the sound passed by. She had memorized the doctor's schedule, knew when rounds typically happened, but even when they were on time, they never brought the answers she needed. It was always more waiting. Dr. Patel had stopped by briefly the morning after surgery, her tone careful, professional, almost too calm. We should have preliminary results in the next day or two, she'd said, her voice like glass, clear but easy to shatter. We're running both pathology and molecular testing. It's thorough, but it takes time. Karen had nodded, forcing herself to show appreciation, even though what she wanted to do was scream. Time was something Lily no longer had in abundance, and every hour they waited, Karen feared the thing inside her daughter grew more powerful. Dan had arrived late the night before, his eyes rimmed with red, his face crumpled with regret. He stood in the doorway for a long time before walking over to Lily's bed and taking her hand. Karen watched the moment in silence. It was complicated, his absence, his work, the choices they'd made. But none of that mattered now. All that mattered was that he was here. He kissed Lily's forehead, whispered that she was strong, that they were all going to fight this together. Lily looked up at him, still so drowsy, and whispered, "Promise you won't leave again?" His throat worked around the words, but he finally nodded. "I promise, baby girl." They waited together. Days bled into each other. Karen kept a notepad filled with questions for the doctors, crossing off each one as they answered, or more often didn't. Lily began eating again, though not much. She watched cartoons in short bursts, colored in her notebook, and once asked in her curious voice, "Mom, do kids die from tumors?" Karen froze, her heart lurching, her hands suddenly damp. She looked her daughter in the eye and said, "Some do, sweetheart, but we're doing everything we can so that doesn't happen to you." Lily nodded like she understood far more than she should. Then she asked what would happen to her stuffed animals if she didn't make it. Karen pulled her into her arms and cried without shame. "You're going to be okay," she whispered over and over, rocking her like she was still small enough to hold in one arm. "You're going to be okay." On the third day after surgery, Dr. Patel returned with the chart in hand and a different look on her face. It was subtle, but Karen noticed. The way her lips pressed tighter, the furrow between her brows. She didn't sit right away. Instead, she glanced at Lily, who was asleep again, and then at Karen and Dan. "We have the biopsy results," she said softly. Karen's whole body stiffened. Her hands locked together so tightly in her lap. They turned, cold. Dan reached over and took one of them. "It is a germ cell tumor," Dr. Patel continued. "Specifically, it's called a yolk sac tumor. It's malignant, but it's one of the more treatable forms, especially in children." Karen's breath caught. Malignant. The word sliced through her. Cancer. It was real now. No longer theory or suspicion, but truth. Dr. Patel went on, her voice calm and unwavering. "We've caught it early. It hasn't spread to other organs based on the imaging we have. That's the good news. The standard treatment is chemotherapy, about 4 to 6 cycles. Children Lily's age tend to respond well. It's going to be hard, but the survival rate is very encouraging." Karen couldn't move. The air seemed too thick. "So, she has cancer, but she can get better?" Her voice cracked on the last word. Dr. Patel nodded slowly. "Yes, there is a strong chance she can recover fully, but it will take time and strength. From her and from you." Dan let out a long breath beside her, and Karen realized he had been holding it for minutes. Karen reached for the paper Dr. Patel handed her, a treatment outline, medication names, a calendar filled with numbers and dates and acronyms she couldn't yet decipher. She stared at it blankly. "When do we start?" she asked. "Soon," Dr. Patel said. "Within the week. We'll begin with the first cycle and we'll monitor her closely. There will be side effects, hair loss, nausea, fatigue, but we'll manage each step. You're not alone in this." That night, after Lily had been told gently, after her questions were answered with careful honesty, Karen sat alone in the small window nook of the room. The city lights sparkled beyond the glass, far away and indifferent. But inside this room, something had shifted. There was clarity now. They weren't waiting anymore. They were moving. They were fighting. And, though Karen still felt fear curl around her heart like smoke, She also felt something stronger beginning to rise. Resolve. The day of Lily's first chemotherapy treatment began before the sun had even risen. The nurses had come in early to prep her, their voices hushed and movements gentle, but nothing about the morning felt soft. Karen stood by Lily's bedside, watching the nurses hook up bags of clear fluid, sterilize the port site, and double-check vitals. She wanted to scream at the machines, at the IV poles, at the quiet efficiency with which they moved, as if this were normal, as if treating a child for cancer was just another item on a to-do list. Lily, small and pale in her hospital gown, looked up at her mother with eyes that carried too much understanding. "Will it hurt?" she asked, her voice still groggy from sleep. Karen crouched beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You might feel a little funny, but they'll be right here watching you, and I'll be here too, okay?" Lily nodded slowly. "Okay, I'm ready." Karen wished she could say the same. Dr. Patel arrived just as the chemotherapy was about to begin. She greeted Lily like an old friend, kneeling to her level and explaining each step in words that were honest but not frightening. "You're getting medicine today that's very strong," she said. "It's strong because it has to fight something tough inside you, but will help your body along the way." Lily gave a small smile, nodding again. She was braver than anyone Karen had ever met. As the first drops of medication entered the port and flowed into Lily's bloodstream, Karen held her daughter's hand and felt an icy fear rise in her chest. This was it, the beginning, the moment they moved from helpless waiting to active battle. There was no turning back now. The next few hours passed in a strange haze. Lily dozed off intermittently, waking to drink sips of water or glance at the cartoons playing on the mounted TV. Karen sat beside her the entire time, barely blinking, counting every drip from the IV bag, as though she could will it to work better by watching closely. Dan came later in the day, carrying a stuffed animal Lily had left behind at home, a floppy-eared rabbit named Marshmallow. Lily lit up when she saw it, her smile the first real one in days. She hugged the rabbit to her chest and said, "Now, I'm ready for anything." Karen felt tears burn her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. By evening, the medication was done. The nurses unhooked the tubes, cleaned the site, and helped Lily sit up slowly. She was exhausted, her skin even paler than before, her voice soft. But she asked for mashed potatoes from the cafeteria, and Karen saw it as a small miracle. They ate quietly together, Lily taking only a few bites before drifting back into sleep. That night, Karen sat at the foot of the bed, her journal in her lap. She hadn't written in weeks, but now the words poured out. She wrote about Lily's bravery, the fear that gnawed at her every second, the ache of watching her daughter fight something invisible inside her. She wrote about hope, the fragile, flickering kind, and how it had shown up today in the form of a stuffed rabbit and a spoonful of potatoes. The next morning brought the first side effects. Lily woke nauseous, her forehead clammy, her stomach twisting in knots. The nurses moved quickly, giving her anti-nausea medication through the port. Karen rubbed her back as she heaved into a plastic basin, her heart breaking with every retch. "I don't like this," Lily moaned. "I know, baby," Karen whispered. "But this is how we make the bad stuff go away. We have to be strong, just a little longer." Lily didn't answer, just curled into herself and held Marshmallow tight. As the days passed, the pattern became painfully familiar. Nausea, fatigue, the occasional fever spike. On good days, Lily would color pictures, watch Disney movies, or play quiet games with the child life specialist who visited from the hospital staff. On bad days, she could barely keep her eyes open. But through it all, Karen stayed. She slept in the chair beside Lily's bed, ate whatever soup the cafeteria sent up, and lived moment by moment. Dan juggled work and home, shuttling back and forth, always trying to be present even when the guilt weighed heavy on him. He wasn't perfect, never had been, but he showed up. And Karen knew that mattered more now than anything. During one quiet afternoon, Lily turned to Karen and asked, "Do you think the medicine is working yet?" Karen hesitated, then said, "I think it's fighting hard right now." just like you are. Lily thought about that. I don't want to lose my hair, she whispered. Karen had known this question would come. She took a deep breath. You might. A lot of kids do, but it doesn't change how beautiful you are. Not one bit. Lily didn't cry. She just nodded, her eyes fixed on a spot on the ceiling. Okay, I'll wear a hat then. A purple one. Karen promised they'd find the best purple hat in the world. With each passing day, Karen learned the rhythm of this new life. Medication schedules, blood counts, signs of infection. She learned how to read the beeping monitors, how to soothe Lily with just a hand on her arm, how to summon strength from places she didn't know existed. She learned how to ask questions without fear, how to demand answers with grace, how to be the fierce and gentle mother Lily needed now more than ever. The nurses began calling Lily the little warrior. Even the doctors took to it. And Lily would smile every time she heard it, a tiny, proud smile that made Karen's chest swell. Because she was a warrior. Every day she fought, and every day Karen fought alongside her. And though the road ahead was long, and the medicine brutal, and the nights often filled with quiet sobs and whispered prayers, they were no longer standing still. They had started the fight. And in that fight, Karen found something stronger than fear. She found purpose. She found power. She found the kind of love that doesn't run or waver, the kind that stands its ground, no matter what comes. It had been nearly 3 weeks since Lily began her treatment, and though the days were difficult and the nights restless, there was a growing sense of rhythm to the battle. Karen had started to recognize small victories, like the mornings Lily asked for toast or the days she managed to smile during story time. It wasn't easy, but they were moving forward. The nurses said Lily was tolerating the first phase of treatment as well as could be hoped. And for Karen, every tiny improvement was a lifeline. She clung to them like stepping stones in a river too wide to see across. Then, without warning, everything changed. It started with a low-grade fever, 99.8 degrees. Not alarming in the world outside the hospital, but in the cancer ward, a number like that was treated with all the seriousness of a fire alarm. The nurses kept an eye on it, watching for a trend. By early afternoon, the number had climbed to 112. Karen tried not to panic, tried to tell herself that it could be 100 harmless things. Kids got fevers all the time, but Lily was not like other kids right now. Her immune system had been obliterated by the chemotherapy on purpose, and even the most ordinary infections could become dangerous. By the time Dr. Patel walked into the room with her brows furrowed and her voice lower than usual, Karen already felt her heart racing in her chest. "We're moving Lily to isolation for observation," Dr. Patel said gently. "We need to run. A full workup. Blood cultures, chest x-ray. We're not taking any chances." Karen nodded, her mouth dry. Lily looked up, confused, a line of sweat forming along her hairline. "Mom, am I in trouble?" Karen knelt down beside the bed and kissed her forehead. "No, sweetheart. We just want to make sure you're safe, okay? You're going to a special room for a little while, but I'll be there the whole time." Lily tried to be brave, but her grip tightened on Marshmallow, and Karen felt the smallest tremor in her daughter's hand. They wheeled Lily to a sterile room at the far end of the pediatric wing, one with a heavy glass door and warning signs posted outside. Only Karen, wearing gloves and a mask, was allowed to stay inside. Every nurse and doctor who entered followed strict infection control protocols. Lily didn't understand why she couldn't see their faces. "They look like astronauts," she said weakly. Karen tried to laugh, but it caught in her throat. She helped Lily settle into the new bed, brushing her damp hair away from her face, singing soft lullabies between the beeping of monitors. The blood tests came back showing signs of neutropenic fever, dangerously low white blood cell counts, and a suspected bacterial infection. Antibiotics were started immediately, dripped through the IV with urgency. But that night, Lily's fever spiked even higher, 103.4. Her breathing grew shallow, her skin pale and clammy. Karen sat up, pressing the call button before she even realized she was moving. Within seconds, a swarm of medical staff filled the room. One nurse took vitals, another adjusted the oxygen flow, and Dr. Patel ordered fluids and another round of antibiotics. Karen stood back, watching helplessly as they worked, her mind screaming silently for them to make it stop. She wanted to tear the sickness from Lily's body with her bare hands, wanted to trade places and bear it all herself. After what felt like hours, Lily finally stabilized. She drifted into a restless sleep, her body weak but fighting. Dr. Patel pulled Karen aside into the hallway, removing her mask with a tired sigh. "We believe it's sepsis," she said, her voice steady but heavy. "The infection got into her bloodstream. We caught it early, which helps. But this is serious. She's in for a tough few days." Karen nodded slowly, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Will she make it?" Dr. Patel looked her in the eye. "She's strong. But yes, this is a setback." Those next few days were the darkest yet. Lily barely woke. Her lips were cracked, her skin dry, her once lively spirit dulled to a whisper. Karen didn't leave the room. She sat by the bed hour after hour, stroking Lily's hand, reading stories she wasn't sure her daughter could even hear. Dan visited every evening, bringing food Karen never touched and clothes she forgot to change into. He brought flowers once, but Karen had to tell him they weren't allowed in isolation. He left them with the nurse, looking crushed. The nights were the worst. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional cough or the beeping of machines. Karen prayed silently, over and over, asking for strength, for healing, for one more day. She read every word in the pamphlets, Googled every medication, searched for stories of children who had overcome odds like these. But nothing truly eased the fear that sat in her chest like a stone. All she could do was stay. And she did. She stayed through the worst of it. Then one morning, as the sun filtered weakly through the small hospital window, Lily opened her eyes. Not all the way, and not for long, but enough to murmur, "Hi, Mommy." Karen gasped, dropping her journal, and rushing to the bed. She touched Lily's cheek and smiled through tears. "Hi, baby. You scared me." Lily blinked slowly. "I had a weird dream. I was flying." Karen laughed, a sound that cracked in the middle. "That's because you're my little superhero." Lily's fingers curled around hers weakly. "Are we still fighting?" Karen nodded. "Yes, baby, and you're winning. You're coming back." The road ahead was still long. Dr. Patel made that clear. The infection had left Lily weaker than ever. Treatment would be delayed. Adjustments had to be made. But the worst storm had passed, and in its wake, something had changed inside Karen. She realized now that this fight wasn't about milestones or perfect responses. It was about moments. Moments when Lily opened her eyes. Moments when she asked for water. Moments when she said "Mommy," with just enough strength to remind the world she was still here. And in those moments, Karen found her resolve, sharper than ever. The setback had shaken them, yes, but it hadn't broken them. Not even close. It was almost a week after the infection scare when Lily began to feel well enough to sit up in bed. Though her body was still fragile and thin, her eyes had regained some of their light. The nurses cheered quietly the first time she ate half, a scrambled egg. Karen watched from her usual spot beside the bed, her heart fluttering at every sign of strength. One afternoon, as the golden haze of sunset filtered through the window, Lily asked, "Can I brush my hair?" The question, so innocent and so normal, caught Karen off guard. She stood, reached for Lily's favorite purple brush from the nightstand, and handed it over with a hopeful smile. Lily raised her trembling arm slowly, dragging the brush gently through her shoulder-length chestnut hair. But almost instantly, strands clung to the bristles. She paused, pulled them away, and brushed again. More hair came out. Her eyes narrowed, and she brushed faster. Karen moved forward quickly, but it was too late. With each stroke, more clumps tangled in the brush, and soon Lily's lap was covered in strands. She stared at them, her small face crumpling. "It's coming out," she whispered. Karen dropped to her knees beside the bed, gently taking the brush from Lily's hand. "Sweetheart, it's okay. This is part of the medicine working. Remember what Dr. Patel said? Your hair might fall out, but it means the chemo is fighting the cancer. Lily didn't answer. Her lower lip quivered and tears slipped down her cheeks silently. She pulled the thin blanket over her head and turned away. Karen stayed kneeling there, holding the brush and staring at the massive hair in her daughter's lap. No amount of preparation or medical explanation could soften this blow. It was real now, visible, a change that no child or mother could ignore. That night, after Lily finally cried herself to sleep, Karen stepped into the tiny hospital bathroom, flicked on the light, and stared at her own reflection. Her eyes were red, her clothes wrinkled, and exhaustion etched across her face like stone. She reached up and ran her fingers through her own hair, thick and untouched, and suddenly it felt unfair. She had her hair. Lily didn't. She sat on the closed toilet lid and wept silently. The next morning, Lily wouldn't talk. She barely looked at Karen. The nurse offered her oatmeal, but she turned her head away. Dr. Patel came by and offered gentle encouragement, but even she couldn't coax more than a nod. Karen knew they had to do something. Something symbolic. Something brave. That afternoon, when Lily finally dozed off again, Karen left the room, walked down the hall to the nurse's lounge, and asked quietly if anyone had a pair of scissors. One of the younger nurses, Mandy, looked up and said softly, "You sure?" Karen nodded. She needs to know she's not alone in this. Back in the room, Karen waited until Lily stirred, then pulled over a chair and sat facing her. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "can I tell you a story?" Lily blinked sleepily. "A long time ago," Karen began, "there was a little girl who was so brave, even when the monsters got close. She was so strong, even when the storms blew in. But one day she got scared. Not because of the monsters or storms, but because of a mirror." Lily frowned. Karen smiled faintly. She didn't like what she saw. She thought she looked different. But what she didn't know was that the bravest warriors always looked different after battle. They had scars. They had changes. But they also had stories. Then Karen reached into her bag and pulled out the scissors. And the warriors. "Mother," she said, decided that if her daughter had to wear a battle crown, then she would too. Lily stared, eyes wide. "Mom, what are you doing?" Karen smiled, eyes wet. "We're in this together, remember?" And without waiting, she took a long lock of her hair and snipped it off. The sound of the blades echoed louder than expected. Then another snip, and another. Slowly she cut her hair down to a jagged crop, her hands trembling but her heart steady. When she was done, she looked at Lily and said, "What do you think?" Lily was silent for a moment, then whispered, "You look funny." Karen burst out laughing, and Lily joined her, the sound fragile but real. Later that day, with the help of Nurse Mandy, Karen gently helped Lily into the bathroom. She stood behind her daughter as Lily looked into the mirror. Her hair had thinned so much it barely covered her scalp. There were bald patches on the sides, and the rest was tangled and lifeless. Can I cut it?" Lily asked quietly. Karen nodded. "Of course, baby. However you want. We can make it pretty." Lily shook her head. "No, just off, like yours." So Mandy helped. With soft music playing from someone's phone, Lily sat calmly while her remaining hair was shaved away, each lock falling gently into a towel on her lap. When it was done, she reached up and touched her scalp, then smiled a little. "It's kind of cold," she said. Karen laughed. "We'll get you a cool hat, maybe with glitter." Lily looked at herself again and tilted her head. "I look like a space explorer." Karen nodded. "You look like the bravest girl in the world." That night when Dan came to visit, he stopped in the doorway, startled by what he saw. Karen with short hair, Lily bald, both of them smiling. "Well," he said softly, "if I'd known there was a hairstyle memo, I'd have joined in." Lily giggled. "You still can, Daddy." He stepped inside, took off his baseball cap and said, "You know what? Maybe I will." In the days that followed, Lily wore her new look like a badge of honor. Nurses called her Captain Lily and gave her sparkly headbands and soft hats. Other kids in the ward started asking for haircuts too, turning fear into camaraderie. Something had shifted. The mirror was no longer the enemy. It was a reflection of strength, of survival, of love shown in the simplest but most powerful way. It had been nearly 2 weeks since Lily's hair fell out, and although the shock of it had settled, the emotional waves it left behind still came and went like quiet tides. The hospital had become a second home in that time, a place of routines and soft-spoken kindnesses. Nurses came and went with familiarity, like extended family who changed bedsheets and offered Jell-O with warm smiles. Karen had memorized every beep, every soft hum of the machines, and every creak in the hallway floor just outside the room. Each day began with a cautious kind of hope, one that took its time rising in her chest, and each night ended in silent prayer. Lily had found a rhythm too, a mix of bravery and resignation that could shift quickly depending on how tired her little body felt. But one gray afternoon, when the sky hung low and the hospital lights flickered in that dull fluorescent way, something unexpected broke that rhythm. A knock came at the door, gentle but deliberate. Karen looked up from her book, and Lily glanced away from the cartoon playing on the TV. A nurse peeked in and said, "There's someone here who'd like to meet Lily, just for a few minutes if that's okay." Karen furrowed her brow. "Someone? Who?" The nurse just smiled mysteriously. "You'll see." Before Karen could object, the door opened wider and a young man stepped inside. He couldn't have been older than 25, maybe 30 at most. He wore jeans, a faded red hoodie, and a Yankees cap turned backward. He had no clipboard, no badge, no stethoscope, but he had a calm about him, like someone who'd walked through his own kind of fire and come out the other side. "Hey," he said softly, giving Lily a little wave. "Mind if I sit for a sec?" Lily looked at her mother. Karen hesitated, then nodded. "Sure, I guess." The young man pulled up the visitor's chair and sat down, folding his hands. "I'm Josh. I used to be here. Not in this room, but on this same floor. Same halls, same medicine. Different cartoons, though." Lily tilted her head, curious now. "You were sick too?" Josh smiled. "Yep, when I was your age, I had leukemia. Spent over a year in and out of this place. Lost my hair, lost a lot of stuff. But I got through it." Karen leaned forward slightly. "Did the nurses send you? Like some kind of support visitor?" Josh shook his head. "Nope. I come on my own sometimes. Just when I feel like someone might need to see a little further ahead." Lily looked at him with wide eyes. "Do you still get shots?" He chuckled. "Nope. I graduated from needles a long time ago. Now I just give blood sometimes or talk to kids like you. But back then, yeah, I got poked more than a pincushion." Lily giggled a little, the sound sweet and light. Karen watched the exchange with a mixture of gratitude and guarded hope. She'd read about programs like this, former patients returning to offer courage, but she hadn't expected it to feel this personal, this gentle. Josh glanced around the room, taking in the drawings taped to the wall, the half-eaten pudding cup, the row of stuffed animals lined like sentries along the windowsill. "You like drawing?" he asked. Lily nodded. "I draw animals. Sometimes. Superheroes too. I made a tiger with wings yesterday." Josh grinned. "That's awesome. I used to draw dragons, big ones with smoke coming out their noses. Maybe next time I visit we can draw something together?" Karen raised her eyebrows. "You're planning to come back?" Josh met her gaze and nodded. "If it's okay. I don't stay long. I just remember what it was like to feel forgotten in a hospital room. Sometimes a visitor who knows the path makes the walk a little easier." Karen swallowed hard. There was something in his eyes, something that didn't need words to explain. A quiet understanding that only those who'd lived inside the storm could carry. Lily was talking again now, asking Josh about his favorite foods, whether he liked dogs or cats, and if he ever threw up on a nurse. Josh answered every question with honesty and humor, telling her about the time he tried to sneak pizza into his hospital bed, or the day he mistook his IV stand for a robot. They laughed, and for the first time in what felt like ages, Karen saw her daughter's shoulders relax. When it was time for Josh to leave, he stood and slipped a little card from his back pocket. "This is my email," he said. "I don't have a big social media following or anything, but if you ever want to send me one of your drawings, or if you just want to say hi, you can." Lily took the card solemnly, as if receiving a mission. "Okay, but only if you draw me a dragon next time." Josh gave her a mock salute. "You got it, Captain." After he left, the room felt different. Warmer somehow. Lighter. Karen tucked Lily in that night and sat in the chair long after her daughter had fallen asleep. She looked at the card Josh had left and thought about how strangers could sometimes see you more clearly than friends. He hadn't just brought a story, he'd brought proof. Proof that the road ahead, though long and hard, had an end. That survival wasn't just possible, it could be beautiful. That Saturday morning brought with it a rare sense of peace. The sky outside the hospital window was painted in a soft blue, and for once the machines in Lily's room seemed to hum more quietly, like they too were honoring the moment. Karen sat at the edge of the hospital bed with her daughter curled beside her, thin but warm, her head resting gently against her mother's side. There was something almost sacred about these mornings when the rest of the world felt like it paused long enough for them to breathe. The nurse, a kind woman named Clara who had grown fond of Lily, had just changed her IV and left them with a tray of warm oatmeal and toast. Lily nibbled at it, but her appetite, as always, was fleeting. Karen had learned not to push too hard, only to encourage with softness, not pressure. When Lily turned to her and said, "Can we look at the photo?" "Book again?" Karen didn't hesitate. She reached into her oversized bag, the one now permanently resting on the hospital floor beside the recliner, and pulled out the worn brown album that had seen better years. It was a simple leather-bound book filled with snapshots of a life that now felt like it belonged to another time. Karen opened to the first page. There was Lily as a baby, swaddled in a pink blanket barely the size of a loaf of bread. Her cheeks were plump, her eyes squinted shut, her mouth forming a perfect O as she cried at the world that had just welcomed her. "That's the first day we met you," Karen whispered, brushing her fingers over the plastic sleeve. "You," cried louder than any baby in that nursery. Lily smiled weakly. "I had a lot to say." They turned the pages slowly, savoring each memory. There was the Christmas photo when Lily was 3, her face sticky with candy cane and her dress wrinkled from hours of playing. There was the picture from her first ballet recital, where she stood in the second row, her tiny arms raised with more determination than grace. There was even the photo from that summer vacation to Yellowstone, when they'd gotten lost on a trail and ended up at the most beautiful lake by accident. As they turned the pages, something began to shift in Lily's expression. She looked not just happy but reflective, like someone studying her own story from a distance. "I like looking at these," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It helps me remember who I was before I got sick." Karen's heart twisted at the sound of those words. She gently tucked a strand of fine hair behind Lily's ear, though there was barely anything left to tuck. "You're still that girl, baby. She's still in there, just taking a little rest." Lily nodded, but Karen could see the questions behind her eyes, the ones she was too tired to ask, but still felt. After a long silence, Lily turned to a page near the back of the album and pointed. It was a photo of the two of them in the backyard on a sunny spring day. Karen was planting flowers, dirt smudged on her cheeks, while Lily danced barefoot in the grass with a ribbon tied around her wrist. "You remember that day?" Lily asked. Karen smiled. "I do. You danced for hours, said you were calling the butterflies to come play, and I swear they listened." They stayed on that page for a while, both mother and daughter quiet in thought. Then, suddenly, Lily looked up with a spark in her tired eyes. "Can we add new pictures one day, after all this?" Karen hesitated only a moment before answering. "Yes, sweetie. We'll make a whole new album, one with all the things we're going to do once you're better, trips and birthdays and sleepovers with your cousins. Pictures of you with long hair and big smiles and maybe even a puppy if I finally give in." Lily giggled softly. You're scared of dogs. I'm not scared, Karen defended with mock offense. I'm respectfully cautious. They laughed together then, a sound that wrapped around the room and seemed to chase the gloom into the corners. Later that afternoon, while Lily rested, Karen stayed by the window, album still open in her lap. She flipped back to the front and slowly went through every photo again, this time alone. Each picture felt like a thread in a tapestry that was still being woven, a reminder of what they had built together through birthdays and scraped knees and bedtime stories. She thought of all the nights she had sung lullabies to a healthy, giggling toddler, never once imagining that one day she would be humming those same melodies beside an IV pole, as the sun lowered behind the hospital wing and the shadows began to lengthen. Karen made herself a quiet promise. They would survive this, not just exist, but live again. There would be more photos. There had to be. She would take them to Disneyland, let Lily wear mouse ears and eat ice cream until her face was sticky and her smile endless. They'd return to Yellowstone, this time with maps and walking sticks and sturdy shoes, and she'd take a picture of Lily by that same lake, standing tall, strong, and free. Karen closed the album and held it to her chest, feeling the soft thump of her own heart against the leather cover. It was a heartbeat of hope, steady and strong. The fluorescent lights in the hospital bathroom buzzed faintly as Karen leaned over the sink, splashing cold water on her face, trying to chase away the exhaustion that had settled deep in her bones. It had been another long night, one filled with whispered prayers, beeping monitors, and the unbearable stillness that comes when your child sleeps too soundly. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, eyes ringed with fatigue, lips pressed tight, strands of gray peeking through her, once richly brown hair. There was a time when she would have fussed over such things, but now every wrinkle told a story, and every tired line was a mark of battle fought for the little girl lying just beyond that door. As she dried her face with a coarse paper towel, her eyes caught something on the corner of the mirror. At first it looked like a smudge, a faint streak from the cleaning staff's rag. But when she leaned closer, she saw it more clearly. Words written in something transparent, like the trail left by a finger on glass. She squinted, unsure if she was imagining it. Slowly, she reached out, her fingertips tracing the faint letters. You are doing enough. Karen blinked. Her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't a hospital sign or some generic motivational message. No one else had been in there with her. The words weren't there the day before. It felt personal, almost intimate, as if someone knew exactly what she needed to hear at that moment when she was crumbling on the inside while trying to stay strong on the outside. She stepped back and stared. The light caught the letters again, and they gleamed faintly like a whisper etched into time. A wave of emotion swept over her so suddenly she had to grip the sink for balance. For days now, she had battled a storm of guilt, the guilt of not catching Lily's illness sooner, of not pushing harder for answers, of not being able to trade places with her. And in that quiet, sterile bathroom, those 5 simple words struck her like lightning. You are doing enough. She didn't know who had written them or when or why. But they mattered. They mattered more than anything anyone had said to her in weeks. She stood there for several long minutes, just breathing, just letting that message settle in the spaces where pain had taken root. When she finally stepped out of the bathroom, the hallway seemed different, brighter somehow, as if that message had lit something inside her that had almost gone out. Back in Lily's room, the little girl was still asleep, curled on her side, with the album tucked close to her. Karen pulled the blanket gently up to her daughter's shoulder and sat in the chair beside her. The nurse had left a note on the whiteboard. Good numbers this morning. Karen exhaled slowly. Maybe it was the message. Maybe it was the labs. Maybe it was nothing but coincidence. But hope stirred quietly in her chest like a bird testing its wings. She reached into her bag, pulled out her journal, and flipped past, several pages filled with desperate scribbles and scattered prayers. She turned to a clean sheet and wrote the words from the mirror at the top. Then she added, "Thank you, whoever you are." Later that day, while Lily sipped some orange juice with a little more enthusiasm than usual, Karen shared the moment with her. "You know what I saw in the bathroom mirror today?" she asked, keeping her tone light. Lily perked up slightly. "What?" "A message." It said, "You are doing enough." Lily's eyes widened, thoughtful. "Maybe it was from an angel," she said simply, as if the explanation were as natural as gravity. Karen chuckled softly but nodded. Maybe it was. Lily's gaze grew serious, her little fingers gripping the edge of her blanket. "Mom, I think you need to hear that more. You always worry. You don't sleep. You cry when you think I'm not looking." Karen's heart clenched at her daughter's quiet perception. "I just want to do everything I can," she murmured. "You are," Lily said, mimicking the exact phrase. "You're doing enough." In that moment, Karen realized how deeply her daughter had grown in the shadows of illness. How wisdom had wrapped itself around her small shoulders and made her both child and teacher. As the day stretched on, Karen found herself repeating the words over and over, like a quiet mantra. When a social worker called and talked about long-term care planning, she steadied herself with those words. When the insurance coordinator brought more paperwork and policies and numbers, she inhaled deeply and whispered them again. That evening, when the doctors made rounds and gently reminded her that recovery would be a long and uncertain road, she clenched her hands, but didn't cry. Not because it wasn't hard, but because she had something now to hold on to. When night came, and Lily drifted off to sleep with the soft sound of lullabies playing from Karen's phone, Karen returned to the bathroom. The mirror still held the message. She took out her phone and snapped a picture, then pulled a pen from her bag. She hesitated for a second, then smiled and leaned forward, writing underneath the original message in small, careful letters. To the next tired mom, yes, you are too. She stepped back and looked at it, heart swelling. Then she walked back into Lily's room, sat beside her daughter, and finally let herself rest. Not because everything was okay, but because she had finally begun to believe that she didn't have to be perfect to be enough. The morning sun filtered through the hospital window, casting soft gold on the sterile white walls and illuminating the tiny threads of dust that floated in the air like glitter suspended in time. Karen sat quietly beside Lily's bed, holding her daughter's hand, both of them wrapped in silence that no longer felt heavy but full of quiet anticipation. Today was the day the doctors would start the final stage of treatment, the one they had all waited for, hoped for, feared, and prayed over. It was the culmination of everything. Every hard choice, every painful moment, every tear and whisper and sleepless night that had led to this point. Karen's fingers trembled slightly as she brushed a strand of hair from Lily's forehead. Her daughter was awake, her pale face glowing faintly in the morning light, her eyes brighter than they had been in weeks. There was a strength in her gaze that both broke Karen's heart and rebuilt it at the same time. "Are you ready, sweetheart?" Karen asked softly, her voice barely rising above the beeping of the heart monitor. Lily nodded, not with fear, but with quiet resolve. "I think so. I want to feel better. I want to go home." Those words, "go home," carried a weight that only those who had lived inside hospital walls could understand. Home wasn't just a place anymore. It was a symbol, a promise, a prayer wrapped in hope. The nurse entered the room with a gentle knock, wheeling a tray that held the final infusion. Karen stood up as the nurse began preparing the line, her eyes darting between the machine and Lily's fragile arm. Everything had to go just right. There was no more room for complications. The nurse, sensing Karen's tension, smiled kindly. "She's come a long way. And you have too, Mom." Karen tried to smile back, her voice catching. "It's just, we've waited for this. I didn't know if we'd make it here." The nurse nodded. "A lot of families don't, but she's strong, and so are you." As the medicine began to flow through the IV, Karen sat back down, holding Lily's hand again, tighter this time. The first few minutes passed in silence, both of them watching the slow drip of the medicine. counting breaths, listening to the quiet whoosh of the machine. And then, almost unexpectedly, Lily turned her head and said, "Mom, when I get better, can we go to that lake again? The one with the little boats?" Karen felt tears rise behind her eyes. That lake, they hadn't been there since Lily's last birthday before the illness. It was the last day that felt normal. "Yes, sweetheart," she whispered. "We'll go. We'll do all the things. Just you and me." Hours passed. The medication continued its steady course. Nurses came and went. Doctors checked in. But Karen barely moved. She watched Lily for signs, for changes, reactions, discomfort. But Lily remained calm. Tired, yes, but peaceful. When the infusion finally ended and the line was removed, Lily looked at her mother and whispered, "Was that it?" Karen smiled through tears. "That was it. You did it." The nurse gently taped the gauze over the needle site and gave Karen a reassuring look. "Now we wait. This part's hard, but we'll monitor closely. If things go well, we'll start talking discharge in a few days." Discharge. The word danced in Karen's head like a tune she hadn't dared to hum in months. She thanked the Avizayat nurse, then turned all her attention back to her daughter, who was already falling into a gentle sleep. That night, as the room dimmed and the quiet returned, Karen pulled out her phone. She scrolled through photos, old ones, Lily on a swing, Lily eating ice cream, Lily with her hair flying in the wind, her laughter frozen in time. So much life. So much left to live. She whispered a thank you to no one in particular and everyone, all at once. To the doctors, the nurses, the stranger who left a message on the mirror. To herself, for not giving up. And to Lily, for being braver than anyone she had ever known. In the early hours of the morning, Lily stirred. Her eyes fluttered, open, and her lips curled into a faint smile. "I had a dream," she said. Karen leaned close. "What was it about?" "We were at the lake," Lily murmured. "And I wasn't sick anymore. I was just me." Karen pressed her forehead to Lily's and let the tears come, not out of fear this time, but out of something deeper. Relief, gratitude, the quiet kind of joy that comes when you've survived a storm you thought might take you under. The treatment had begun, and with it, a new chapter. Nothing was promised. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Karen allowed herself to believe that healing wasn't just possible, it had already begun. The wind at the lake carried the scent of pine and water, cool and clean, like it had been waiting all these months to welcome them back. Karen stood at the edge of the dock, her hand shielding her eyes from the sun as she watched Lily ease herself into the little rowboat, her laugh echoing across the gentle ripples. It was the same lake where they'd celebrated Lily's birthday before everything had changed, before the pain and fear and hospital walls became their new reality. Now, here they were again, not because they had to escape something, but because they were finally returning to something real. Karen's heart swelled at the sight. Lily, her skin no longer pale but kissed with the color of life, wore a baseball cap to shield her still-growing hair. Her movements were slower, yes, but they were her own. No more IV poles trailing behind her. No hospital bracelets clinging to her wrist. Just Lily, 13 years old, free and laughing. Karen stepped into the boat behind her, gripping the sides as they wobbled slightly. "You sure you remember how to steer this thing?" she teased. Lily grinned, holding up the oars. "I remember enough to get us lost in the middle, at least." The water was calm, the sun high, and for the first time in nearly a year, Karen allowed herself to laugh freely, without the shadow of worry hiding behind it. They rowed out to the center of the lake, where the water shimmered like glass and the birds above called lazily to one another. Karen rested her hands in her lap and watched her daughter gaze out at the horizon, her face calm, eyes thoughtful. "You know," Lily said quietly, "when I was in the hospital, I used to dream about this." Karen nodded. "I did too. It didn't feel real, Lily continued, dipping her fingers into the water. Even when they said I was getting better, I didn't believe I'd actually be here again. With you. With the trees and the sky and everything feeling so normal. Karen reached across the small space between them and took Lily's hand. You fought like hell to get here. You never gave up. You didn't either, Lily whispered. There was silence then, but it wasn't empty. It was full of everything they'd been through, everything they'd overcome. The long nights, the uncertainty, the terrifying moments when it felt like the world was slipping through their fingers. And now, they sat in a boat in the middle of a lake, healed not just in body but in spirit. When they returned to shore, Karen spread out a blanket on the grass and unpacked a small picnic. Nothing fancy, just sandwiches, lemonade, and Lily's favorite sour gummies. The sun dipped lower in the sky as they ate, and Karen watched her daughter stretch out beside her, her hands behind her head, eyes closed to the sky. I don't want to forget any of it, Lily said suddenly, even the hard parts. Karen looked at her in surprise. Why? Because it made us who we are, Lily replied. It made me understand how lucky we are to just be here, to be alive. I don't want to pretend it didn't happen. Karen felt tears threaten again, but held them back. Then we'll remember it, all of it, and we'll use it to help others. In the months ahead, Karen and Lily would speak at local fundraisers for childhood cancer. They'd volunteer at the hospital, bringing comfort to other families in the thick of their battles. They would not just survive, they would live with purpose. The experience had carved something deep inside them, something unshakable. That fall, Lily returned to school. Her classmates, unsure at first how to act around her, quickly discovered she was still the same Lily, funny, curious, and fiercely smart. Only now she carried a quiet strength, the kind earned through fire. Karen returned to her job part-time, but her world no longer revolved around deadlines or client meetings. It revolved around moments, small, irreplaceable ones, like sitting by the fire with Lily on chilly nights, or driving with the windows down, music blasting, their voices tangled in the lyrics. Sometimes she'd still find herself waking up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, expecting the worst. Old habits formed in fear didn't die easily. But then she'd hear Lily's soft breathing down the hall, or the creak of her bedroom door as she got up to get water, and she'd be reminded that the nightmare was over. One chilly November morning, as they prepared to rake leaves together, Lily turned to her and said, "Hey, Mom, remember the message on the mirror?" Karen paused. She hadn't thought about it in a while, but it had been the spark, the strange, almost magical sign that had nudged her toward finally acting. "I do," she said slowly. "I still don't know who wrote it." "I think," Lily said thoughtfully, "whoever it was, maybe it was just what we needed. A push." Karen smiled. "Maybe it was you from the future." They laughed. The sound light and full of truth. Life hadn't gone back to the way it was. It had become something entirely new. Richer, deeper, more fragile perhaps, but more beautiful because of it. As they stood there, rakes in hand, under a sky brushed with autumn gold, Karen realized that the story of Lily's pain wasn't just about illness. It was about transformation, about listening, about never ignoring what seems small, because sometimes the smallest things hold the loudest truth. And in that realization, in that crisp November air, she finally understood. They hadn't just come full circle. They had drawn a new one entirely, with stronger lines, brighter colors, and a future filled with hope. And that brings our story to a close. A journey of pain, love, and healing that reminds us how precious life truly is. Sometimes it's the smallest signs or quietest whispers that lead us to the most important decisions. If this story touched your heart even just a little, we hope it stays with you long after the video ends. Thank you, from the bottom of our hearts, for taking the time to listen, to feel, and to reflect with us. Your presence here means more than words can say. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell so you never miss a new story. And we'd truly love to hear from you. Drop a comment below to share your thoughts, or even a personal experience that this story reminded you of. Your words could bring comfort or inspiration to someone else listening. Until next time, take care of yourself and the people you love. We'll see you in the next story.